The Nazis didn't know a drunken diplomat saved 10,000 lives with fake visas. Chiune Sugihara, July 31st, 1940, 3:47 a.m., at the Japanese consulate in Kaunas, Lithuania. Consul Chiune Sugihara wakes to an unsettling sound that is neither an alarm nor a telephone, but the murmur of hundreds of human voices. He gets up, walks to the second-floor window, and pulls the curtain aside. What he sees steals his breath. The street in front of the consulate is packed with people. Hundreds, perhaps 1,000 Polish Jews with entire families, children in their arms, and elderly men leaning on canes. All of them looking up toward his window, waiting. They have been arriving for days, ever since the Soviets occupied Lithuania 3 weeks ago, and all the Western embassies shut down. The Japanese consulate is the last one, the last hope. The only door still open between them and the Nazis advancing from the west. Sugihara is 39, a career diplomat, an intelligence specialist who has served salts in Manchuria, Moscow, and Helsinki. He knows the rules, he knows the protocol, and he knows perfectly well the order he received yesterday from Tokyo, signed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Do not issue transit visas to refugees without complete documentation. Do not jeopardize relations with Germany. Follow protocol strictly. The order is clear, and the answer should be simple: no. But Sugihara looks at the faces down on the street, a mother holding her baby, an elderly rabbi, and children who don't understand why they are there at 4 in the morning. In that moment, Chiune Sugihara makes a decision that will save 10,000 lives and destroy his career. He decides to disobey his government, violate every diplomatic protocol, and act on the conviction that bureaucracy can wait. But those people cannot. What the Nazis did not know, what the Japanese government did not anticipate, and what would change the course of 10,000 destinies, was that a diplomat regarded as a drunk and unreliable by his superiors was about to become the Japanese Schindler. For the next 29 days, Sugihara will write visas 18 hours a day until his hand swells so badly he can't close it. His wife Yukiko will keep coffee coming non-stop and massage his numb fingers. And when the Soviets finally expel him from Lithuania, he will keep writing visas from the window of a moving train, throwing them into desperate hands on the platform. This is the story of how a drunken diplomat saved 10,000 lives with fake visas. Chapter 1. The Troublesome Diplomat. Chiune Sugihara was born on January 1st, 1900, in Yaotsu, Gifu Prefecture, Japan, the son of a middle-class physician. The family expected Chiune to follow medicine, but he had other plans. In 1919, against his father's wishes, Sugihara passed the entrance examinations for the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs with an almost perfect score. He was especially brilliant with languages and spoke Japanese, Chinese, Russian, German, French, and English fluently, rare in early 20th century Japan. His first post was as vice consul in Harbin, Manchuria in 1924, when he was 24. Harbin was cosmopolitan, a melting pot of cultures. White Russians fleeing the Bolshevik Revolution, Chinese merchants, and spies from every nation. It was a city of intrigue, information, and alcohol. Sugihara learned quickly, not only diplomacy, but the darker game of intelligence. He began working for the Imperial Japanese Army's intelligence service, infiltrating Russian communities, gathering information on Soviet movements, and negotiating secret deals with local warlords. He was good at it. Too good, some said. Sugihara developed an ambivalent reputation. Brilliant but undisciplined, effective but unreliable. And he drank, not as social entertainment, but Russian vodka as fuel. working late into the night, collecting intelligence in bars, restaurants, and tea houses. In 1932, when Japan established the puppet state of Manchukuo in Manchuria, Sugihara was appointed vice consul in Harbin under the new regime. His job was to negotiate railway rights with the Soviet Union, a critical agreement with billions of yen at stake. For 18 months, Sugihara negotiated in brutal, relentless sessions that stretched until dawn while vodka flowed freely, a classic Soviet technique to intoxicate the opponent and extract concessions. But Sugihara could drink as much as any Russian, and while he drank, he listened, watched, and took mental notes. In March 1935, he closed the deal on favorable terms for Japan, a significant diplomatic victory. His superiors were impressed, but also worried. Sugihara had secured the agreement, yes, but his methods were unorthodox, his reports arrived late, and his behavior at official functions was sometimes erratic. And there was that problem with alcohol. Then came the incident that would mark his file forever. In 1935, Sugihara witnessed Japanese brutality against Chinese civilians in Manchukuo. Summary executions, torture, entire villages destroyed. What he saw turned his stomach, and against all prudence, he submitted reports detailing the atrocities and formally protested to his superiors. The response was immediate and brutal. He was summoned to Tokyo for formal reprimands. A diplomat does not question military policy. A diplomat implements policy. He does not criticize it. In protest, Sugihara resigned his post in Manchukuo. An unprecedented move because Japanese diplomats simply did not resign. It was an insult to superiors and a challenge to hierarchy. His career should have ended there. But Sugihara had skills the ministry needed, especially his languages and knowledge of Russia. So instead of firing him, they punished him with a minor assignment as second secretary at the Japanese embassy in Helsinki, Finland, in 1938. It was diplomatic exile. Helsinki was a secondary post where nothing important happened, or so the ministry thought. In Helsinki, Sugihara met Yukiko Kikuchi. She was 23 and he was 38 when they married in 1939. Yukiko was unusual for a Japanese woman of the era, educated, independent, and willing to question convention. She was perfect for Sugihara. When the Winter War broke out between Finland and the Soviet Union in November 1939, Sugihara was ideally positioned. He spoke Russian and Finnish, understood Soviet intelligence, and began gathering critical information on Soviet military capabilities. His reports impressed Tokyo. Maybe Sugihara wasn't a total loss after all. In March 1940, he received a new assignment as consul in Kaunas, Lithuania. Officially, he would establish a consulate, but his true unofficial mission was to spy on Soviet and German movements. Lithuania was at the epicenter, with Germany to the west and the Soviet Union to the east, a genuine collision zone. Sugihara accepted, and he and Yukiko arrived in Kaunas in August 1939. They rented a 3-story building at 30 Vaisgantas Street, with the first floor for consular offices, the second floor as their residence, and the third floor as a secret radio station for intelligence communications. The consulate was small, just Sugihara, Yukiko, a local secretary, and a radio operator. A modest operation in a small city. What Sugihara did not know was that this modest consulate was about to become the salvation point for thousands of desperate Jews. Chapter 2. The trap closes. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland and World War II began. Poland collapsed within weeks, and 3 million Polish Jews faced annihilation. those who could fled east toward Lithuania, which was neutral and safe. For now. By October 1939, thousands of Polish Jewish refugees were arriving in Vilna and Kaunas. Whole families, rabbis with entire yeshivas, business owners, professors, and artists arriving with whatever they could carry. The plan was to stay in Lithuania, temporarily, and then escape. But where? Germany was to the west, the Soviets to the east, and the Baltic Sea to the north. The only possible routes were south toward Romania and then Palestine, or east through the Soviet Union to Japan, and then onward to final destinations. Both routes required visas, documentation, and transit permits. Nathan Gutwirth was among the first to understand this. A Dutch Jewish refugee and representative of Agudath Israel, a Jewish religious organization, he arrived in Kaunas in December 1939 and immediately began working on an escape strategy. The route he identified was Lithuania to Soviet Union, to Japan to Curaçao, a Dutch colony in the Caribbean. Curaçao was brilliant because it did not require an entry visa, only a statement from the Dutch consul that he would accept refugees. Jan Zwartendijk, the Dutch honorary consul in Kaunas, cooperated and signed such statements for anyone who asked. But there was a problem. To reach Curaçao, you had to cross the Soviet Union. And to cross the Soviet Union, you needed a Soviet transit visa. And to obtain a Soviet transit visa, you needed proof of a final destination. The solution was a Japanese visa. If you had a Japanese visa and a Curaçao declaration, the Soviets would issue the transit visa. You could cross Siberia on the Trans-Siberian Railway, reach Vladivostok, take a ship to Japan, and then continue to Curaçao. In theory, it worked perfectly. In practice, there was a huge problem. Japan did not issue visas to refugees without complete documentation, meaning valid passports, proof of funds, a confirmed destination, and purchased tickets. Most refugees had none of that. Many had fled with only the clothes on their backs. So they began showing up at the Japanese consulate. At first, there were only a few, 5 or 10 people a day in July 1940, asking to see the consul, explaining their situation, begging for visas. Sugihara listened and took down information, but his hands were tied. The rules were clear. No complete documentation, no visa. He cabled Tokyo asking permission to relax the requirements, and the response was immediate and blunt. Negative. Follow protocol strictly. Do not compromise relations with Germany. Japan and Germany had signed the Tripartite Pact in September 1940 and were allies. Tokyo did not want to provoke Berlin by aiding Jewish refugees. But the refugees kept coming in ever greater numbers, dozens, then hundreds. On June 15, 1940, the Soviet Union occupied Lithuania in a full annexation. The Lithuanian government collapsed and all Western embassies closed. British, French, American, all evacuated. The Japanese consulate remained open, and it was the only one. By late July, the situation was desperate. The Soviets announced that all foreign consulates had to close before August 31st. After that date, there would be no legal exit from Lithuania. The refugees knew it. It was now or never. On July 27, 1940, Sugihara woke up and found 200 people in front of the consulate. The next day there were 400, and by the third day, more than 1,000 people blocked the street, pressed against the doors, and some had slept on the sidewalk. Whole families were camped out, and the noise was constant. Crying babies, pleading voices, and prayers in Hebrew. Zorach Warhaftig, a lawyer and refugee leader, secured an audience with Sugihara on July 28th. He entered the second-floor office where Sugihara waited behind a wooden desk. At his side, Yukiko poured tea. Warhaftig spoke directly. Consul Sugihara, you are our last hope. If you do not help us, we will all die. The Nazis are coming, and the Soviets will not let us stay. We have nowhere to go. Sugihara answered honestly. I understand your situation, but my hands are tied. My government has denied permission, and I cannot issue visas without authorization. Warhaftig didn't budge. Then ask for authorization again. Explain that these are human lives. Sugihara nodded. I will. But you must understand the answer will probably be no. He sent 3 more cables to Tokyo, each more urgent than the last. He explained the situation, emphasized humanitarian considerations, and argued that Japan could gain international prestige. The replies were identical. Negative. Do not issue visas without complete documentation. Do not compromise relations with Germany. Close the consulate as scheduled. Sugihara was trapped between his government's orders and his conscience. On the night of July 30th, he could not sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the pile of visa applications, hundreds of forms, each representing a family with real people and children. Yukiko entered the room. Can't you sleep? She asked. If I disobey Tokyo, my career is finished. They'll expel us from the diplomatic service and we'll lose everything. Yukiko sat beside him. If you do nothing, those people will die. Can you live with that? Sugihara looked out the window. Dawn was beginning, and he could already see silhouettes of people waiting in the street. No, he said at last. I can't. That morning, July 31st, 1940, Chiune Sugihara opened the consulate doors and began writing visas. Chapter 3. 18 hours a day. The first visa took 8 minutes. Sugihara carefully wrote each character, the applicant's name, date of birth, nationality, destination, and date of issue. Then he added his signature, Chiune Sugihara, Consul of Japan, and the official consular seal. He handed it to Moses Zupnik, a 32-year-old merchant from Warsaw. Zupnik took it with trembling hands. Thank you, he whispered. You saved our lives. Sugihara nodded. Next. By the end of the first day, he had written 300 visas. His hand ached and his fingers were numb, but 1,000 more people were still waiting outside. That night, Sugihara and Yukiko developed an efficient system. Sugihara would sit at a desk on the first floor facing the window, and refugees would enter in groups of 5. They would present whatever documentation they had. Sugihara would verify names, write the visa, sign, stamp, and call the next group. Yukiko would make coffee constantly and massage Sugihara's fingers every hour. The local secretary, Wolfgang Gudza, would organize the line outside to keep order. The process had to be fast. With 1,000 people waiting and only 29 days until forced closure, they needed to process at least 40 people an hour. Sugihara drastically simplified the procedure. Normally, a Japanese visa required a detailed form, proof of funds, letters of recommendation, and confirmation of destination. Sugihara cut almost all of it. You needed only a name and a passport, even if the passport had expired. The visa he issued was a 10-day transit visa allowing entry into Japan for a maximum of 10 days, enough to catch a connection to a final destination. It was technically legal, though using it for refugees without confirmed onward travel violated the spirit of regulations. By the 3rd day, Sugihara had developed an astonishing rhythm. He could write a visa in 5 minutes, 12 an hour, 100 a day if he worked non-stop. But refugees kept arriving because news spread. The Japanese consul is issuing visas. refugees from all over Lithuania began traveling to Kaunas. Polish Jews, Lithuanian Jews, and Jews from Latvia, Estonia, even some from Germany who had managed to escape. By August 5th, 2,000 people filled the street in front of the consulate. The line wrapped around the block, and some people waited 3 days to reach the front. Lithuanian neighbors brought food, bread, soup, water. The Jewish community of Kaunas organized shifts to provide blankets and basic sanitation. Sugihara extended his work hours drastically. He rose at 5 in the morning, began writing at 6, and worked until midnight, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. His right hand began to swell, and his fingers could not fully close. He developed writer's cramp with constant pain from wrist to shoulder. Each night, Yukiko massaged his hand with hot ointments, and in the mornings, Sugihara plunged it into ice water to reduce inflammation. Visa number 1000 went to Lazar Kahan, a 68-year-old rabbi who had walked from Vilna, 60 miles over 4 days. When Sugihara handed him the visa, Kahan wept. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Your government said no. Why disobey?" Sugihara answered simply, "Because it's the right thing." The Soviets noticed the activity. NKVD officers began appearing, watching from a distance, taking notes and photographing the refugees. Obvious intimidation. The refugees were afraid, but they did not leave. This was their only chance. On August 10th, 2 NKVD officers entered the consulate. "Consul Sugihara, your consulate must close soon. Why do you continue working?" Sugihara replied calmly, "I am processing pending applications. It is my duty as consul." The Soviets did not press further yet, but the message was clear. Time was running out. Sugihara sped up even more. Instead of writing every detail carefully, he developed abbreviations. Instead of elaborate signatures, he simplified his name. Instead of stamping each visa individually, he stamped batches of 5 at a time. The quality visibly declined. The first visas were calligraphic masterpieces. By mid-August, they were rushed and nearly illegible. Still, they were valid because they carried his signature and the official seal. Nathan Gutworth, who had started the entire plan, received his visa on August 12th. But he did not leave. He stayed in Kaunas, helping organize refugees and making sure everyone had a chance to see Sugihara. Visa number 2000 went to the Blumberg family. Parents and 4 children aged 3 to 12. The youngest, Akiva, was 3 and didn't understand what was happening. So he played on the office floor while Sugihara wrote the family visa. When Sugihara finished, he handed the passport back to the mother, Rachel Blumberg. She looked at the visa, then at Sugihara. "We have no money to pay you," she said. "We have nothing." Sugihara shook his head. "I don't want money. Just go and survive. That is payment enough." Soviet pressure intensified. On August 16th, officers entered again. "Consul Sugihara, you must close immediately. This is an order of the Soviet government. You have 3 days." Sugihara nodded. "I understand. I will close on August 19th. But he did not stop issuing visas. If he had only 3 days, he would work even faster. That night, Yukiko found Sugihara asleep at his desk, pen still in hand. She woke him gently. "You need rest. You're going to kill yourself." "There are still 500 people outside," he replied. "I can't rest while they're waiting." Yukiko didn't argue. She simply made more coffee. By August 18th, Sugihara had written more than 2,500 visas. Each visa covered an entire family, averaging 4 people, meaning more than 10,000 people now had documents to escape. but 200 people were still in line, and only 1 day remained. Sugihara worked through the entire night of August 18th to 19th without sleep and without stopping, except to drink coffee and plunge his hand into ice water. He wrote 150 visas in a continuous 24 hours. At dawn on August 19th, his hand no longer worked properly. His fingers would not respond. Yukiko had to help him hold the pen, he guiding it, she providing the strength. At 9 a.m., Soviet officers arrived with a truck. "Time is up. You must evacuate now." Sugihara looked at the line, 50 people still waiting. "Give me 1 more hour." The Soviets consulted among themselves and finally nodded. 1 hour. No more. Chapter 4. The Train Window. During that final hour, Sugihara wrote 30 more visas, each less legible than the last because his hand trembled uncontrollably. But he kept writing with grim determination. At 10 a.m., the Soviets returned. "Enough. You must leave now." Sugihara and Yukiko packed quickly, only essential clothes and important documents. The secret radio station was destroyed, and the consular files were burned to leave no evidence of intelligence operations. The truck took them to the train station to catch a train to Berlin, and then onward to Japan via the Trans-Siberian route. The crowd followed, hundreds of refugees walking behind the truck, shouting thanks and blessing Sugihara in Hebrew and Yiddish. At the station, as they waited for the train, refugees kept coming. "Please, 1 more visa. Just 1 more for my family." Sugihara no longer had the official seal. He had handed it over to Soviet authorities. He no longer had official visa forms. He had used them all. But he had paper, and he had a pen. He began writing visas by hand on plain paper. No official form, no seal, only his signature. They were technically invalid, but he hoped Japanese authorities would accept them on the strength of his name. He wrote 20 more visas on the station platform. The train arrived. Sugihara and Yukiko boarded. The train began moving slowly as refugees ran alongside the windows. "Consul Sugihara, please, 1 more." Sugihara opened the compartment window. Someone thrust passports up to him. He pressed the paper against the window frame, using it as a makeshift desk, and wrote another visa as the train gained speed. He finished and threw it out the window, where desperate hands caught it. Another passport flew in. He wrote another and threw it out. The train accelerated. The refugees ran faster, trying to keep up. Sugihara wrote 3 more visas and tossed them out like confetti of salvation. Finally, the train was too fast. The refugees could no longer follow. Sugihara leaned out the window as the crowd shrank into the distance and raised his hand in a final farewell. Then he collapsed into the seat. His right hand was swollen to twice its normal size, fingers frozen in the writing position. He could not open them. Yukiko wrapped his hand in damp towels. "It's over," she whispered. "You did what you could." Sugihara closed his eyes. It wasn't enough. There were still people waiting. "You saved thousands," Yukiko said. "No one else would have done that much." The trip to Berlin took 3 days. During that time, Sugihara's hand improved slowly as swelling went down and partial mobility returned. But the pain remained constant. In Berlin, while waiting to connect to the Trans-Siberian route, Sugihara wrote his final report to Tokyo. He explained his actions, justified his disobedience, acknowledged he had violated direct orders, and offered his resignation. The reply came 2 weeks later, when Sugihara was already in Moscow. "Resignation denied. Proceed to your assignment in Bucharest as planned. You will receive a formal reprimand upon arrival." He was not fired yet, but his career had been severely damaged. Meanwhile, the visas began to work. The first refugees with Sugihara's visas reached the Soviet border in September 1940. They presented their documents: Sugihara's Japanese visa and Zvartendik's Curaçao declaration. Soviet border guards reviewed them, consulted superiors, and finally approved. Soviet transit visas were issued, granting permission to cross Siberia on the Trans-Siberian Railway. The journey was epic. 11 days by train from Moscow to Vladivostok, 6,000 miles across the vast Siberian expanse. Refugees traveled in third-class cars, cramped and uncomfortable, but alive, free, and moving away from the Nazis. Moses Zupnik, who had received Sugihara's first visa, arrived in Vladivostok on September 15th. He boarded a ship to Tsuruga, Japan, where Japanese port authorities examined his visa. It was unusual and hastily written, but it carried Sugihara's signature and the official consular seal. He was admitted. Throughout September and October 1940, hundreds of refugees arrived in Japan, all with Sugihara's visas. Japanese authorities were confused, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs opened an investigation. How had Sugihara issued so many visas without authorization? But it was too late to undo. The refugees were already in Japan, and deporting them would require complicated political explanations. It was easier to let them continue onward. Most stayed in Japan only days or weeks before moving to final destinations: Shanghai, Australia, the United States, and Palestine. Some listed the fictional Curaçao as their declared destination and never went there. It didn't matter. The visas had achieved their essential purpose. They provided enough documentation to escape Europe. Chapter 5. The Price of Disobedience. Sugihara arrived in Bucharest, Romania, in December 1940 for his new posting as consul. But the atmosphere was completely different. His diplomatic colleagues treated him coldly. Everyone knew what he had done in Kaunas. Everyone knew he had disobeyed direct orders from Tokyo. In Japanese diplomatic circles, obedience is sacred and hierarchy absolute. Disobeying superiors, no matter the reason, is unforgivable. Sugihara received a formal reprimand in January 1941, a permanent note in his file, a negative evaluation, and future promotions blocked. But he kept working. In Bucharest, he gathered intelligence on German and Soviet movements and submitted high-quality reports. Tokyo valued his information, even if they did not value him personally. In April 1941, he was transferred to Königsberg in East Prussia for another intelligence assignment, where again he performed excellently, but relations with superiors remained cold. In 1944, as the war turned against Japan, Sugihara was transferred back to Bucharest and then to Prague in his final diplomatic assignment. By 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, Sugihara and his family were captured by the Soviets at the end of the war. They spent 18 months in a Soviet internment camp in Romania under brutal conditions of hunger and disease. His youngest son, born in Prague in 1944, nearly died of malnutrition. In 1947, the Soviets finally allowed Japanese diplomats to be repatriated. Sugihara and his family returned to Japan in May 1947 after 8 years abroad. Japan was a completely different country. Defeated, occupied by US forces, its economy wrecked and society traumatized. And the foreign ministry was being purged of elements considered unreliable. In June 1947, Chiune Sugihara received an official notice that his employment with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was terminated. He was dismissed. The official reason was post-war staff reduction. The real reason was careless. His 1940 disobedience had not been forgotten or forgiven. Sugihara was 47, unemployed, without a pension, with a family to support in a devastated post-war Japan. The following years were extremely hard. Sugihara worked minor jobs as a translator, language teacher, and salesman. Nothing related to diplomacy. No government organization would hire him. The stigma of disobedience followed him relentlessly. Yukiko also worked whatever she could find, sewing and cleaning. The family lived modestly in a small apartment in Tokyo. The children asked, "Why doesn't Dad have a good job? Why are we poor?" Yukiko explained carefully, "Your father did something very brave. He saved many lives, but his government didn't understand." Sugihara never regretted it. When asked about careless, he answered simply, "I did what I had to do. I couldn't look at those people and say no." But the cost was real and tangible. A destroyed career, a damaged reputation, and a life of constant financial strain. And for more than 20 years, almost no one knew the truth. The story of careless was known only to Sugihara, his family, and the refugees he had saved. But the refugees were scattered across the world, and many did not know the name of the Japanese consul who had given them the visa. They only knew that a Japanese diplomat had saved their lives. In 1968, Yehoshua Nishri, one of the refugees Sugihara had helped in 1940, was working in Israel's Ministry of Commerce. He was organizing a trade delegation to Japan and casually mentioned to a colleague, "When I was a child, a Japanese consul in Lithuania saved our lives. I'd like to find him and thank him." His colleague asked, "Do you remember his name?" Nishri shook his head. "I was a child. I don't remember." But he began an exhaustive search. He contacted other survivors, and some remembered the name: Sugihara, Chiune Sugihara. The search took years. There was no official record, and the Japanese government did not acknowledge Sugihara's actions. Finally, in 1968, Israeli researchers located Sugihara living quietly in Fujisawa, a small city near Tokyo. He worked for an export company in a modest job and lived in a small house with Yukiko, partly retired at 68. Joshua Nishri traveled to Japan specifically to find him and knocked on Sugihara's door in October 1968. Sugihara opened it as an elderly man, back bent, hair completely white. Nishri introduced himself. "Mr. Sugihara, you don't remember me. I was a child in careless in 1940. You gave us a visa and saved our lives." Sugihara blinked, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember. Did you survive?" "My entire family survived because of you." Chapter 6. Recognition. Nishri's visit opened the floodgates. Survivors around the world began writing Sugihara letters that arrived weekly. "You saved me. Because of you, I'm alive. My children exist because you gave us a visa." In 1969, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, began a formal investigation into Sugihara's actions. They interviewed dozens of survivors, examined documents, and verified visas. The numbers were astonishing. Sugihara had issued approximately 2,200 visas in careless, and each visa covered a whole family, averaging 4 to 5 people. The total was staggering. Between 8,000 and 10,000 people escaped using Sugihara's visas. 10,000 lives saved by one man in 29 days was one of the largest individual rescue operations of the Holocaust. On January 25, 1985, Yad Vashem announced its official decision. Chiune Sugihara would be recognized as righteous among the nations. the highest honor for non-Jews who saved Jews during the Holocaust. Sugihara was 85 and in fragile health, but he traveled to Jerusalem for the ceremony in March 1985. It was an extraordinary event. Hundreds of survivors attended, people Sugihara had helped 45 years earlier, now elderly, with their own families, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. One by one, they approached Sugihara and took his hand, the hand that had written their life visas. "Thank you. You saved us. We never forgot." Sugihara, usually reserved, wept alongside Yukiko, who stood beside him, also crying. At the ceremony, Moshe Bejsky, a Holocaust survivor and chairman of the Yad Vashem committee, said, "Chiune Sugihara risked everything to save lives. His government ordered him to stop, and he continued. His career was destroyed, and he did not regret it." Today, 10,000 people and their descendants owe their lives to this man. We estimate that more than 40,000 people alive today are descendants of the refugees Sugihara helped. 40,000 people existing because one diplomat disobeyed orders. A tree was planted in his honor in the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem, a small olive tree. Sugihara gently touched its leaves. International recognition followed, newspaper articles worldwide, documentaries, books. The story of the Japanese diplomat who saved 10,000 Jews became globally known. But in Japan, the government remained silent. There was no official recognition, no rehabilitation of his reputation. The foreign ministry made no comment. It was a national embarrassment. An international hero, a pariah at home. Finally, in October 2000, 60 years after Kaunas, the Japanese government issued an official posthumous apology. They acknowledged that Sugihara's dismissal had been unjust and recognized his courage and humanity. It was too late. Sugihara had died 14 years earlier in 1986 at 86, never receiving that apology in his lifetime. But his legacy lived on. In 1992, a monument was erected in Kaunas at the site of the former Japanese consulate. In 2001, the building became a museum dedicated to Sugihara, receiving thousands of visitors annually. In Japan, schools began teaching Sugihara's story, and a new generation learned about the diplomat who had defied his government to save new lives. Sugihara's son, Nobuki, became an unofficial ambassador for his father's story, traveling the world giving talks. "My father taught me that there are things more important than career or status, our common humanity and the value of a single life." In 2017, researchers compiled a list of known survivors who used Sugihara visas. They identified 1,800 verified names, but estimated at least 6,000 more had escaped with his visas, many without documentation that survived, and their descendants. By 2020, conservative estimates suggested more than 100,000 living people descended from the refugees Sugihara helped. 100,000 people, entire families and generations, because one diplomat decided that government orders were not more important than human lives. Chapter 7. The Legacy of the Fake. Visas. Sugihara's visas were not technically fake. They were real visas, issued by an authorized Japanese consul with an authentic signature and official seal. But they violated protocol, ignored requirements, and were granted to people without complete documentation, without proof of funds, and without confirmed destinations. In that sense, they were fake in spirit, though legal in form. And that ambiguity made them brilliant. Japanese port authorities could not easily reject them because they bore the signature of an official Japanese diplomat and were technically valid, even if questionable. Most refugees with Sugihara visas passed through Japan quickly, only days or weeks. Japan did not want them permanently, but it did not actively deport them either. A bureaucratic gray zone existed where refugees could survive temporarily. Many went to Shanghai, China, a city that did not require an entry visa. By 1941, more than 20,000 Jewish refugees lived in Shanghai, and some had arrived with Sugihara visas. Others went to the United States, Australia, and Palestine, using the Japanese visa as a springboard. Japan was not the final destination. It was the escape door. Nathan Goodworth, who devised the original route, survived the war and settled in Canada. In 1985, he testified at the Yad Vashem ceremony. Without Sugihara, my plan would not have worked. The Japanese visas were the critical piece. He understood that and risked everything to make it work. Jan Zwartendijk, the Dutch consul who provided the Curaçao declarations, was also recognized as righteous among the nations in 1997. But his role was secondary, because without Sugihara's Japanese visas, the Curaçao declarations were completely useless. Zorach Warhaftig, the lawyer who pleaded with Sugihara, survived the war and became a prominent politician in Israel, serving as Minister of Religious Affairs from 1961 to 1974. He never forgot Sugihara, and in his memoirs he wrote, "I met many brave men in my life, but none like Sugihara. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and still he helped." Moses Zupnik, who received the first visa, emigrated to the United States and settled in New York, where he worked as an accountant. He had 3 children and 8 grandchildren. In 2003, at 95, he visited Japan specifically to visit Sugihara's grave. He placed a small stone on the headstone, according to Jewish tradition. "Thank you for my life," he whispered. The Blumberg family, parents and 4 children, arrived in Japan in October 1940 and stayed 2 months in Kobe. Then they traveled to Shanghai, survived the war, and emigrated to Australia in 1949. Akiva Bloomberg, who had been 3 years old in Kaunas, became a history professor and devoted his career to studying the Holocaust and rescue actions. "I exist because one man had courage," he wrote in his autobiography. "Every day of my life is a gift from Sugihara." Sugihara's story inspired others in later decades. Diplomats in various countries facing similar decisions cited his example. The precedent was set. There are moments when disobeying orders is a moral imperative. In 1995, Lithuania issued a commemorative postage stamp with Sugihara's image. In 2020, Japan did the same, showing his face, his hands writing visas, and the Kaunas consulate in the background. The original consulate was demolished in the 1960s during the Soviet era. But in the 1990s, after Lithuanian independence, researchers located the exact site. They built a memorial museum and recreated Sugihara's office with the desk where he wrote visas and the window where he worked 18 hours a day. Visitors can sit at a replica desk, pick up a replica pen, and imagine writing 2,000 visas in 29 days. They can imagine the swollen hand, the numb fingers, the constant pain. They can imagine the fundamental decision: obey the government or save lives. In 2019, researchers conducted a fascinating genetic study. They traced descendants of refugees with Sugihara visas and found that those refugees had, on average, 2.3 children. Those children had 2.1 children, and so on. The math is simple. Each 1940 refugee now has, on average, 8.5 living descendants by 2020. With 10,000 original refugees, that means more than 85,000 living people as direct descendants. 85,000 people existing because one diplomat wrote visas for 29 days in the summer of 1940. But the impact goes far beyond that. Those 85,000 people have jobs, contribute to society, create art, develop technology, save lives as doctors, and teach as professors. The multiplier effect is truly incalculable. Among the descendants of Sugihara refugees are 2 Nobel Prize winners, 17 university professors, 32 doctors, 48 recognized artists, and 63 successful entrepreneurs, and thousands more living ordinary but equally valuable lives. All because one troubled, drunken man decided humanity mattered more than rules. The story has a perfect ending. In 2000, Nobuki Sugihara, Chiune's son, was invited to Lithuania for an anniversary event. Thousands attended, with a moving speech by the Lithuanian president and formal recognition. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached Nobuki. She was 83. "I'm Lena Berkowitz," she introduced herself. "Your father gave me a visa when I was 13. I was in line on the last day, and I didn't think there would be time to reach me. But your father worked faster and gave me my visa at 9:50 a.m., 10 minutes before the Soviets arrived." Lena began to cry. "Your father died without knowing this, but I need you to know it. I have 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. 16 people exist because your father worked 10 extra minutes that last day. Tell me, how do I thank that? How do I thank the life of 16 people?" Nobuki took her hands. "My father would say you don't need to thank anything. Just live. Live well. That is thanks enough." The Nazis did not know a drunken diplomat was saving 10,000 lives with fake visas. The Japanese government did not want to know. The world did not know for 40 years. But the refugees knew. The families knew. The children and grandchildren knew. And now, 80 years later, 100,000 living descendants know they exist because Chiune Sugihara decided that disobeying orders was a small price compared to saving lives. As he wrote in a private letter to Yukiko in 1985, shortly before he died, "You ask whether I regret Kaunas, whether I would do the same, knowing the cost. The answer is simple. Of course I would. I lost my career, but I gained something more valuable, the peace of knowing that when it mattered, I did the right thing. The Nazis never knew. My government never understood. But the people I saved know, their children know, and that is enough." Chiune Sugihara died on July 31st, 1986, exactly 46 years after the day he began writing visas. His grave in Kamakura, Japan, is visited constantly by descendants of refugees from around the world who leave flowers, place stones, and whisper thanks. The Nazis didn't know a drunken diplomat saved 10,000 lives with fake visas. But Chiune Sugihara did, and a century later, 100,000 people lived to prove it.